Good day, everyone. My name is Anthony Leiserowitz. I'm the director of the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication at the Yale School of the Environment. And I'm really excited to be with you again for the second year and to give you an update and a little more information than what I provided last year about climate change in the American mind. So just a quick reminder, we study how do Americans and other people around the world respond to the issue of climate change. What do people understand and misunderstand about the causes, the consequences, and the solutions to climate change? How do they perceive the risks? So the likelihood and severity of different types of impacts. What kinds of policies do people support or oppose? And then what kinds of behaviors are people engaged in around climate change, which of course increasingly is not just carbon pollution reduction behaviors, but increasingly preparedness and adaptation behavior. Ultimately, as scientists, our question is answering the question, why? What are the underlying psychological, cultural, and political reasons why some people get really engaged with this topic, others are kind of apathetic, and some are downright dismissive and hostile, at least here in the United States? So we work all over the world. We've been doing lots of work at the national level, the state level, the local level. But for today, I'm going to really zero in on climate change in the American mind. So let me just remind those who, or introduce those who didn't see me speak last year, that it would be, I'll start with a proposition, that it would be great, it would be wonderful, in fact, if all Americans could have the equivalent of Climate Change 101. A full semester course dedicated to understanding, here's how the climate system works, here's what the causes are, the consequences, the solutions, several months worth of instruction on here's what this issue really is and why it's so important. But of course, that's never going to happen, not in a population of over 300 million people. Most people don't have the background, they don't have the training, they don't have the time, they don't have the interest to really get in and understand all those details. So the critical question is, given that the vast majority of people are going to have a limited amount of shelf space devoted in their heads to this issue, what are the core things that people need to understand? Okay. Now, of course, if you're a water resource manager, you need to know lots of additional information, but I'm talking about the general public here. What is it vitally important that people know? And in the course of our work and many of our colleagues around the world, we think we've identified 5 key ideas that we think all people should understand. And moreover, we boiled those 5 key ideas down to just 11 words. And so let me start there. And here we go. The 5 key ideas. Scientists agree. It's real, it's us, it's bad, but there's hope. Now that's very simple, but it's deceptively simple. I like to call these meta ideas because, in fact, you can instantiate, you can provide evidence for, you can tell thousands of stories reinforcing each of these critical understandings in your audience's mind. Okay? Here are all the ways that we know that climate change is, in fact, happening on planet Earth today. Here's all the dozens of ways that we know that climate change is being caused by us, by human activities, okay? Of course, the climate has changed naturally over millions and even billions of years of Earth history, but this time it's different. This time it's the direct result of the burning of fossil fuels and land use change around the world, okay? Humans basically dumping carbon pollution into the atmosphere, which is having all kinds of cascading effects. Here are the thousands of ways that it's already harming us right here, right now. And of course, it's going to get much, much worse in the future if we continue on the current path. And then last, but absolutely not least, but there's hope. And this is absolutely critical to begin to communicate because most people don't yet know what we can do about this. That in fact, we have most of the solutions we need already in hand. But people don't know what they can do as individuals. We don't know what we can do as communities, as cities, as states, as the nation, and as the world. So it's really, really important to begin to communicate to people, not just the seriousness of the threat and the risks, which of course is exactly what the insurance industry is all about, is managing and mitigating risk, but also helping us understand how do we mitigate and manage that risk. And so again, I think the insurance community has a particular opportunity to engage your consumers, your constituents, your audiences in understanding and responding effectively to this global crisis. So how are we doing here in the United States? So let me now begin with where Americans are on some of these key ideas. So what you're looking at now is a set of data that we've been collecting for over a dozen years. We do nationally representative surveys that we call Climate Change in the American Mind. 2 surveys every year, every fall, every spring, every fall, every spring, and we have been doing that now for over a dozen years. And what you can see here is that when we started back in the fall of 2008, American opinion was kind of at a high water mark at about 71%. That's on the left-hand side of your screen. But then we saw a 14 percentage point drop from 2008, bottoming out in 2010. Then it was slowly been working its way up, working its way back up until you can see on the far right, that's our most recent release data as of spring of 2021, that we were at 70% of Americans who understood that it was happening. And it's been right around 72, 73, 72, 70 now for over a year. Now, on the one hand, this is good news because we're finally back up to that high water mark of public understanding. This is even real. But to put that in a context, if we were in Japan, this number would be over 95%. So Americans, unfortunately, still have a ways to go to even understand that this is actually happening. Okay? And you can see here on the bottom part of the chart that 15% of Americans actually say it is not happening. And the other remainder are basically people who say they don't know. Okay? So even on the fundamental question of, is this real? Americans still have a ways to go in understanding this issue. But then we look at, do they understand the causes? And here we see that, again, on the far right, 57% as of last March understood that this is mostly human caused. So that is still a lot of room for growth. And in fact, you've got 30% of the country who say that they think it's just natural. And that is a really important misunderstanding, because if in your mind this is just natural cycles, then it's something we just need to weather, we just need to get through, but eventually this will all work its way out and we don't need to actually change anything. It's only once you understand that this is the direct result of dumping gigatons, billions of tons of carbon pollution into the atmosphere for decades, that have been accumulating into the atmosphere and increasingly warming the planet as a whole with all those cascading effects, that you begin to understand how important it is that we have to take action to reduce that carbon pollution. Okay, and then we look at, do people understand that actually there's a scientific consensus on this? So multiple studies using very different techniques have all converged on the fact that it's at least 97 and probably now up to about 99% of climate scientists are convinced that climate change is happening and human caused. Not what are the impacts on the Indian monsoon going to be in the year 2080, about which there's still a lot of uncertainty, but about the fundamentals. Is this real? And is this human caused? There is no legitimate scientific debate within the scientific community at all. And so what we've seen is that people are increasingly understanding this, this basic fact. And you can see we're at a high water mark at about 57% of people who understand that, but it's only 57%. And moreover, the vast majority of Americans do not understand that that consensus is more than 9 out of 10 scientists. So even this is still a fundamental misunderstanding for many, many people in the United States. And then we look at the question of, are people worried about this? Now, this stands in for a whole bunch of measures of their assessments of the risks of climate change, and I'll show you a couple of those in a bit. But basically, you can see that worry levels have been on the rise over the past decade. And we're at about 64% of Americans who are at least somewhat worried about this issue as of March of 2021. But only 25% say that they're very worried. So why is this? Why don't Americans currently perceive this as a really serious and worrisome threat? Well, for many people, they still think of this as a distant problem. Distant in time, that the impacts won't be felt for a generation or more, and distant in space. This is about polar bears or maybe some developing countries, but not the United States, not my state, not my community, not my friends, not my family, not me. And as a result, it's psychologically distant. It just becomes one of 100 other issues that's out there. And maybe I kind of wish somebody would do something about it, but I don't see why this is important. I don't see why this is urgent. Okay, so this too remains a key fact. And again, this is right at the heart of the insurance industry, is helping people understand and appreciate the risks that we are in fact not just risk, the harms that we are already experiencing, and that we have to be taking action to both protect ourselves as well as reduce them over the longer term. And then, because I know this is on everyone's mind, here's what we found about Americans' understanding that global warming is already affecting weather in the United States. Now note, this is from March of this year, and we found that about 6 in 10 Americans think that global warming is affecting weather in the United States, with about 31%, just under a third, who think it's already affecting our weather a lot. Now, this will be one of those measures that will be very interesting to see how it changes in response to the 5 months since we last asked this question, which have been brutal. Okay, we have seen record-setting heat waves, wildfires, hurricanes, and of course, just a record-setting drought across the southwest part of the United States. I mean, just massive, massive impacts. I believe over a third of Americans have been directly affected by these kinds of extreme weather events. So does that begin to connect? Are people connecting those dots? I would say in our larger research, we're finding that Americans are just starting to connect the dots between climate change and these extreme weather events. So again, I think this is one of the really important opportunities of the insurance industry, because this is what you do. You help us manage and mitigate these kinds of risks, especially from things like extreme weather. Then just to take it one step further, we've also asked Americans, how prepared are you for these? And what we see is that overwhelmingly people are not. Only 4 out of 10 Americans say they even have an emergency supply kit in their home. And only 28% say that they have a disaster emergency plan that all members of their family know about. So we're just not ready. Okay, and that's not ready on a household level. And of course, what we all know is we're not ready on an infrastructure level. Our infrastructure in many cases is old and already falling apart and failing. And then you throw these record-setting extreme weather events on them, and it just can't handle it. And we've seen that story over and over and over again, unfortunately, still in real time today. Okay, so now let me turn to what we call the Yale Climate Opinion Map. So this is a tool, an interactive tool that we've made available on our website. I encourage you to come look, or just Google Yale Climate Opinion Maps and you'll easily find it. And this is our attempt to try to provide you this kind of information at the state and local levels where so many of you are actually working. Because it's great to have these national numbers, but in the end, if you're working in, let's say, Nebraska, you care about what people in Nebraska think, not necessarily what people on the coast think. So we have produced this tool that helps you understand, here's what people currently understand about climate change, how they perceive the risk, what kinds of policies they support, what kinds of behaviors are they taking, all the way down to even the county level. And so let me show you quickly what that looks like. So this first slide that I'm showing you is just at the national level, the national average of worry about climate change. And what you can see is that as of the end of 2020, 63% of Americans said that they were worried about global warming. Again, useful number, but not so useful if you're working in a particular state or a particular location. So when we then look at how that translates at the county level across the country with this next slide, you see that there's tremendous variation across the country. So the darker the red, the more people in that county are worried, and the darker blue, the less worried they are. And what you see is that there is variation across the country, that not all Americans are equally worried about this issue. And this kind of map has lots of really fascinating patterns in it, which I don't have time to talk about, but I will just point you to Texas as one of my favorite examples, because Texas in many people's minds is just this conservative, very rightward, state, often led by climate denying governors. It seems like it's one of the last places in the country you could have a constructive conversation about climate change. It turns out that's just not true. When you look within the state of Texas, the county level, you see a whole series of counties that I would encourage you to look at right along, say, the border with Mexico, that are more worried about climate change than most of the counties in California, liberal California. What's going on there? Well, this relates to other research that we've done that finds that actually, contrary to common wisdom, which is that only white, well-educated, latte-sipping liberals care about climate change, it's just not true. The demographic that cares the most about climate change are Latinos. And that's what you're seeing right there along the border in Texas, and of course in other critical states across the country. And this is one of the fastest demographics that's reshaping politics, culture, society across America. So it's just to say that there's tremendous things that you can learn by looking at this level. So now just to reinforce what I was saying about this sense of distance that many people have, in this next slide, we ask people, do you think global warming will affect plants and animals? Okay. And what we see is that there's just a huge already consensus across the country. I mean, 71% of Americans think that yes, global warming will harm plants and animals, as in not people, but plants and animals. There's only one county in America, which if you look at this map, you'll be able to find it, where you don't have a majority of the population that thinks this, okay? So that's, will global warming harm plants and animals? But how about will it harm people in the United States? So now let's look at the next slide. And you see already that not so much, okay? The colors have shifted dramatically into the yellow and even into the blue. How about how big of a risk is it to, and how much will it harm you personally? And if you then look at the next slide, is that it suddenly becomes very, very blue. That's because, again, far fewer people think that global warming will affect them directly, even though we are, of course, all being affected right now. But people aren't yet connecting the dots between climate change and these extreme weather events and all the other related events that are directly related to climate change. So again, this is still a critical opportunity for all of us, including the insurance industry, to help people better understand that this is actually happening right now. This is not distant in time and space. Okay, now I'm going to turn to the fact that we often talk about the public, but there is no single public on climate change or frankly, any important issue. And so I want to quickly introduce you to Global Warming's 6 Americas, that there are 6 very different audiences in this country that each respond to this issue very differently. And that's vital for you to be thinking about when you're talking about your consumers or your constituents. They're not all the same. So here I'm showing you these 6 different groups. The first is a group we call the alarmed. They're already convinced it's happening, human caused, urgent. They strongly support action. Then a group we call the concerned. They also think it's happening, human caused and serious, but they still think of it as distant in time and space. So they don't yet see this as an immediate risk. Then come the cautious, and they're still on the fence. Is this real? Is it not? Is it human? Is it natural? Is it serious? Is it overblown? They're paying attention, but are still kind of confused. Then a small, but I think important group we call the disengaged, who basically say, I don't know anything about this. I think I once heard that term climate change or global warming, but I don't know what it is or why I should even pay attention to it. Then comes a group we call the doubtful. And these are people who say, I don't think it's real, but if it is, it's just natural cycles. So they don't pay much attention to it or see it as much of a risk. And then last but not least are the group we call the dismissive, who are firmly convinced this is not happening. It's not human caused. It's not serious. And overwhelmingly, they tell us that they're conspiracy theorists. They say it's a hoax, it's scientists making up data, it's a UN plot to take away our sovereignty, or it's a get-rich scheme by Al Gore and his friends, and other such conspiracy-type narratives. But importantly, they're only 8%. They're only 8%, but they're a really loud 8%. Okay, they tend to dominate the public square and make people think that they're half or more of the country, but they're not. Okay, in fact, 92% of the country is actually happy to have a constructive conversation about climate change. Okay, so don't let the tiny 8%, and in fact, it's even a tinier proportion that are actually active on, say, social media, et cetera, dominate and intimidate everyone else into climate silence, because that's what we too often find across the country is people afraid to talk about climate change because they're afraid of starting an argument with one of these very, very small minority of people. Now, just to reemphasize the fact that there are very different views about and conversations happening, this next slide is, if you could ask an expert on global warming one question, what question would you ask? You see that the groups, the doubtful and the dismissive on the right-hand side of your screen, their main question is, how do you know that it's happening or human caused? And on a deeper level, they're asking, why should I trust you? The middle groups are saying, okay, so it's happening in human caused, but so what? Why should I care? How does this connect to anything in my life or that I care about? And the alarmed and concerned groups, on the other hand, are saying, okay, I got it. It's happening. It's human caused. It's serious. But what do we do? What do we do? What can I do as an individual? What can we do as a community? What can we do as a nation and the world to solve this? And again, insurance is one of those incredibly powerful tools that we have developed as human beings to help us manage these exact kind of risks. So again, you are very uniquely positioned to help engage the larger community, not just here in the United States, but around the world in this critical issue. And then the last slide I just want to show is that we've been tracking the changes in these 6 different groups over time. And what we've seen is a dramatic shift, is that back in 2015, the alarmed and the dismissive, those kind of 2 polar opposites, were basically tied at 11 and 12% each. But since then, the alarmed have grown by 15 percentage points, while the dismissive have actually dropped pretty substantially. And now the alarmed outnumber the dismissive more than 3 to 1. Okay, that reflects a fundamental shift in the underlying social, cultural, and political climate of climate change. And that's why we're now seeing very robust conversations happening at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, even including by Republican mayors and governors and so on, who are addressing an issue that is far more real for many people than it was 10 years ago. So it's just to say the tides are shifting very dramatically on this issue. So just to conclude, what are the main recommendations I have for you? One is simple. Talk about it. Talk about it with your colleagues. Talk about it with your employees. Talk about it with your constituents. Talk about it with your customers. Okay, they're looking to you as a trusted source because, again, this industry helps us manage and mitigate risk. Know your audience. Who are they? And meet them where they are, not where you are. I cannot emphasize that enough. You need to be thinking and putting yourself in their shoes, helping them address the issue and engage the issue based on where they are, not where you are. Okay. And one tool to help you do that is to think of these 6 different Americas, okay? And trying to figure out who is this person or who is this community I'm trying to engage? Where are they in that spectrum? Because you need a very different approach given if they're alarmed versus cautious versus doubtful. And then there's no formulas here, but just a really helpful guideline. Simple, clear messages. Simple, clear messages, not complicated. Okay? Repeat it often, 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 repeat it often. We usually forget that part. By a variety of trusted messengers, which of course includes you. And then just to bring it back to where we started, at least the 5 key ideas that we think everybody should understand. Scientists agree. It's real, it's us, it's bad, but there's hope. And then just last, we put all of our research available to us, the world on our website. So if you are ever interested in learning more or following to see what the latest results are, please just come to visit our website and sign up. And with that, thank you very much and best wishes for the rest of the conference.